Welcome to The Debrief, where we talk with the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the headlines they're covering this week and where the story's going next. I'm Sarah Westwood, and I'm here with Editor-in-Chief Hugo Gurdon. And Hugo, Senator Elizabeth Warren is recycling a sort of familiar line that the Trump-era tax cuts cost trillions of dollars. And now she's using that argument to blame Republicans for the need to raise the debt ceiling this year. Why is that a backwards argument?
Yeah, she's been out on TV, Sarah, and tweeting and saying, if the Republicans hadn't spent $2 trillion on tax giveaways to the rich and to corporations, we wouldn't need to be raising the ceiling. One of the reasons this is so backwards, and I mean, it's a fundamental sort of philosophical reason, is that clearly the Republicans didn't spend money. By what they did was pass legislation which prevented that money from being collected. When you lower taxes, what Elizabeth Warren is implying is that somehow or other that money belongs to the government, and if the Republicans, and it doesn't belong to the people who earn it in their wages and salaries, etc., that by default it should be hers and should belong and be at the disposal of people on Capitol Hill who wish to spend it on programs. So it's backwards in that respect. It's also backwards from the point of view of what actually the impact of the tax cuts were. You can on paper say, okay, at current rates, this will mean that $2 trillion less is collected over a certain period of time. But that completely ignores the economic impact of those cuts. And the truth is that those cuts, they increased direct investment into this country. They increased revenues. I think over the course of 5 years, revenues went up by 22%. Household incomes were up, I think, by thousands of dollars. So there were great benefits because of this, and it is also untrue to suggest that these mostly went to corporations rather than to individuals.
That was a really interesting point from the column you wrote about this week, how much the revenues did jump, even though the rates were lowered for just about everybody. Why don't we hear Republicans talking more about that, especially as we head into a big fiscal fight?
Well, part of the reason is that the Republicans are not very good at their at messaging and communications, but the other reason is messaging works when it strikes a chord with what people feel. And to say, look at all these great benefits from the tax cuts at a time when people are feeling the economy is, they're wondering if it's going into recession, and some of them actually already saying that they feel that it is in recession. It doesn't work if people think that doesn't really strike a chord with them. What really strikes a chord is when the Republicans are saying it is massive spending by the Democrats which has caused inflation. People are worried at the moment about inflation. They see their buying power, their buying power of their wages and salaries in decline because they're not rising as fast as inflation. So the messaging on this is not about what great things the tax cuts did to the economy, but about inflation. And of course, it's not the Republicans spending $2 trillion on tax cuts. It's the Democrats spending $5 trillion or so on the American Rescue Plan and Inflation Reduction Act and other totally misnamed pieces of legislation which in fact stimulated inflation.
What do you see as the most likely area where House Republicans might focus their demands for spending cuts? There's some Republicans who are squeamish about cutting the Pentagon budget. Do you think that House Speaker Kevin McCarthy will be able to unify Republicans?
Well, Kevin McCarthy is going to have a very tough time unifying Republicans. There are those that want to see defense cuts, and they're the same people generally who are opposed to the amount of aid that is being given to Ukraine, and they see that as a possible area for cutting. That's one which I would oppose, and I think a lot of Republicans would oppose, and I hope is not where they make the cuts. There is 500, what we have argued for at the Washington Examiner is that Republicans need to recognize that when they control only one chamber of Congress and they don't control the White House, there's a limit to the amount that they're going to be able to do. They're not going to be able to, balance the budget or any extraordinary, big thing like that. They need to recognize the limits on what they can do, agree on restrained action but unified action, and find perhaps $500 billion where they can agree that they will fight for those things and not divide themselves and break up, and fracture the conference in order to disagree about what they're going to get. There's money left over in the American Rescue Plan, which has not yet been allocated, hundreds of billions of dollars. That might be an area where Republicans can agree amongst themselves that we're going to claw that money back and save that money for the Treasury. I hope that that's the case.
Well, Hugo, thank you so much for being here today. You can get more writing from Hugo and the rest of the commentary team at washingtonexaminer.com.